So I want to draw attention once again to the welcome mat that I have laying on the floor up here, and it'll be over there in the education building, and it says, "Extravagant welcome." Tell me, is that accurate or not? Are we being truthful with this welcome mat, or is it masking some kind of weakness that we might have? As you ponder that, let me tell you what I did a few years ago. I was asked to lead the worship service, or the worship planning for the Indiana-Kentucky Conference annual meeting. And the theme of the conference that year was extravagant welcome. And perhaps my most creative contribution to worship that year was beginning the annual meeting, the very start of the annual meeting, with a PowerPoint presentation about welcome mats. It was a PowerPoint presentation about welcome mats, and I set it to the music of Bon Jovi, who has a song called "Welcome to Wherever You Are." I'm going to share some of the lyrics from that song. "Maybe we're all different, but we're still the same. We all got the blood of Eden running through our veins. I know sometimes it's hard for you to see. You're caught between just who you are and who you want to be. Welcome to wherever you are. This is your life. You made it thus far. Welcome. You've got to believe that right here, right now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Welcome to wherever you are." So welcome. And I hope that you are exactly where you're supposed to be this morning. Now, of course, this song reminded the people in the audience that day of the UCC slogan, "No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you're welcome here." You see that everywhere. And again, the question is that really true? Do we really welcome people no matter where they are or who they are on life's journey? Some of the welcome mats on my PowerPoint presentation were serious, they were sentimental, and others were more playful, such as the one that says, "Hi, I'm Matt." I actually ordered one of those for my son-in-law, whose name is Matt, and I gave it to him for Christmas. And I was just in California, and even though they have moved since the last time when I gave them that mat for Christmas, they still have that mat on their front porch. So are there any mats in here? Matt Lanfer, are you here? Any mats? Yeah, there you go. Go get a mat that says, "Hi, I'm Matt." You'll like it. Your friends will like it. Another welcome mat in my presentation said, "Please stay on the mat. Your visit is very important to us. Your knock will be answered in the order in which it was received." I had a lot of fun with this. Some of the mats in my presentation were not so welcoming, however. One of them said, "Come back with a warrant." And another one said, "This is not a joke. If you ever want to see these people again, bring me a 5-pound rib roast in a plain brown bag. Signed, the dog." And then I think my favorite one was this: "The neighbors have better stuff." Now, I think everyone would agree that congregations and denominations should be welcoming, whether they have the better stuff or not. The UCC is not the only denomination that welcomes people, of course, but we have managed to make it one of our more prominent talking points, much to the chagrin of other denominations who seem to think that we think we're the only denomination that is welcoming, which is not true at all. However, you may remember the television commercials that we produced, that our denomination did, and it came out a few years ago. Each commercial ended with a voice claiming, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. One commercial depicted a church with 2 bouncers turning people away in front of the church. You remember those commercials? Anyone? Sure. And then there was another commercial that featured a church with an ejector seat in the congregation. So if the people were people of color, if they were elderly or disabled, if they were gay or lesbian, if they just had noisy children, the bouncer in one commercial would turn those people away, and in the other commercial, the ejector seat threw them up in the air, and they didn't come back down. I guess they were up in the rafters somewhere. Now, of course, no church that I know of has bouncers or ejector seats, and yet some congregations do reject certain folks in either overt ways or just subtle ways. One of the ways I think churches reject people, maybe not even realizing it, is when they close their communion tables to them. Because even if a church says that they are welcoming everyone, how welcoming can they truly be if their table is closed? And this is why if you go to the United Church of Christ website, you'll find these words, and I think you'll also find it on the Missouri Mid-South Conference website. It says, "We believe in extravagant welcome. This is why we insist that God's communion table is open, not closed, and God's gift and claim in baptism are irrevocable." And then it goes on to state our motivation for being this way or doing this. It says, "Our congregations extend hospitality as a sign of God's inclusive love." So as UCC folks, we may not always be welcoming, but we certainly try. In 2007, I attended the General Synod, which was held that year in Hartford, Connecticut. And I remember one of the keynote speakers was Bill Moyers, who's the popular journalist. And he gave a really great speech, but what I really remember is when he began by talking about the UCC theme of extravagant welcome, and he said that he could not think of another denomination that would have a Baptist as its keynote speaker, which is what he is. So yes, we are, or we try to be welcoming, sometimes extravagantly so. But so what? What happens after that? What happens after people walk across the welcome mat? As you think about that question, let me delve into the scripture readings briefly for a moment, because both of these are stories about welcoming, but not exclusively about welcoming. The first one that we read is from Genesis chapter 18. And here we find Abraham, who is an old man at this time. You know the story. He's catching a little afternoon siesta when all of a sudden he sees 3 men approaching. So he runs out to greet them and invites them to stop there at Abraham's tent and have something to eat and rest. And they agree. So Abraham ducks into his tent and he tells his wife Sarah to make some cake while he runs out and slaughters a calf. I guess they didn't have a lot of company. If they were willing to go to that extent, it must have been a rare event. They were excited. And then together with the help of a servant, they prepare this huge meal for these 3 guests. Now the whole time Sarah, like a good wife is supposed to do in a patriarchal society, she stays in the tent. But while there, she overhears Abraham and these 3 gentlemen speaking, and she hears one of them say that she will become pregnant, which, as we know, made her laugh. You remember that story. Now, other than the notion that an elderly woman is going to have a baby, the other interesting thing about this story is that the Lord is represented by 3 men, which, of course, later on will feed into Christian Trinitarian theology, right? Now, I don't think we should read all that theology into this story, I think all it's really trying to say is that Abraham put out the welcome mat for the Lord. I think more than likely the writer of the story is suggesting that the Lord, that is God, is accompanied by a couple of his own servants. But that's for theologians to grapple with. The second story that we heard today is the familiar account of Martha welcoming Jesus into her home and then busying herself with all sorts of domestic chores, which was actually the culturally appropriate thing to do. And in the meantime, her sister Mary decides, maybe she didn't like doing dishes, but she decides that she would rather take advantage of this opportunity to sit at the feet and learn from this very wise sage who's there to visit. And as we know, Martha becomes just a little irritated by Mary until Jesus tells her that Mary has chosen the better part. That is, Martha, the hospitality can wait. Now, what struck me about both of these stories is how the narrative moves beyond the welcome. It begins with a welcome, but it moves beyond the welcome. In the Genesis story, the welcoming of the Lord is important, and yet the purpose of the story really is to announce the future birth of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, who becomes the father of Jacob, who becomes, his name is changed to Israel, right? So it's an important story. And then in Luke's story of Martha and Mary, the welcoming of Jesus is quickly downplayed in order to get to the real point of the story, which is that even women in a patriarchal society need to sit at Jesus' feet. So it's never enough just to welcome someone. Think of the times that you have welcomed someone into your home. Do the events of the day come to a screeching halt as soon as your guests step over the welcome mat? Of course not. The welcoming is merely the beginning of something that is better and something that is more important. Which brings us back to the United Church of Christ's theme of extravagant welcome. I think that's a great talking point. I think we've got a lot of mileage out of that. But what happens after the welcome? That's what I want to know. What happens after the welcome? Yes, we open our doors and we open our communion table to people who may feel rejected for whatever reason in other churches, in other places. But what do we do with them once we get them? What do we do? I love the phrase that we say to people after they say thank you. Sometimes, if we're feeling especially gracious, we will say, "You are more than welcome. You are more than welcome." In this sentence, I would like to emphasize the word more. You are more than welcome. That is, we certainly welcome you, but we want to do something beyond that. It goes beyond the welcome. Welcome you across the welcome mat is only the beginning. We also want to pay attention to you once you cross the mat. So my message to our denomination and this congregation, with its emphasis on extravagant welcome, is to make sure that we do more than just welcome people. We are good at that, sometimes extravagantly so. We are known to welcome people into the life of our congregations that are even shunned in other places, and that's great. But then what? Do we pat ourselves on the back and say, "Hey, look who we allowed in our church today"? Or do we actually engage them in ministry? Although we might not be disciplining the previously unwelcomed in many churches, that many churches often do, are we discipling them? Although we might not be tearing them down by rejecting them, Are we building them up in faith? Although we might not be slamming the door in their faces, are we opening their doors to the divine? Although we might not be pulling the welcome mat out from underneath their feet, are we persuading them to stand on their feet for the realm of God? Finally, although we practice extravagant welcome in our church, do we have the better stuff? Amen.